Hey, can you make a video discussing what poetry is and a video recommending books for people who want to get into poetry? Also, I'm subscribed.
Well, you called, and I answered. Today we're going to be going over 5 book recommendations for beginners who are looking to get into poetry. And it is my sincere hope that before you enter the Insta Poetry pipeline and society convinces you that you're incapable of understanding poetry outside of that you consider some of these options as an alternative. Welcome back to my channel, and if you are new, hi, my name is Danae Young, and I am a chronic poet. Thanks for your condolences. You can find links to all of my published poetry as well as my 2 poetry chapbooks in the description of this video.
Also, by the way, I'm planning on doing a Q&A when we hit 1K subscribers for this new channel, so I thought I'd start collecting questions now as we army crawl our way to that last 150 subs. Please comment any questions you have related to writing, publishing, reading, or me as an author down below, and I'll answer it in that video.
I believe that a huge reason why people don't get into poetry, other than the horrendous teaching approach that our schools typically use to introduce poetry to people, is that they're not reading the right type of poetry for them. They haven't found the type of poetry that excites them. So I could compile a list of a few approachable poetry collections that come to mind, mention them in this video and just call it a day. But this is not, some booktube channel that's posting their annual one-off poetry video. We're trying to be the poetry channel. So we're going to be taking a more specific approach to this. That's why each of the poetry collections that I'm recommending today are written in a different style. That way you can focus on one or more of these styles that you get excited by and you might want to explore as a reader, as well as emulate as a writer. It'll be like a choose your own adventure poetry edition. Hopefully you see the vision. If you have no idea what poetic style you might gravitate towards, hopefully this video will give you more insight in regards to that. But when in doubt, never underestimate the throwing shit at the wall approach. It's like online dating if it was actually tolerable and you got genuine enjoyment out of it. Like, a lot of times it's hard to tell on a first date, you're kind of warming up to someone. So you take the second and third dates to kind of solidify, okay, do I want to go all in on this relationship with Dickinson, or should I let Gardner take me out next Saturday? And of course, in this case, monogamy is never needed. We're going to start with a collection that leans more into the pastoral. So poetry more focused on imagery and depicting the natural world. I see the works of Mary Oliver get recommended a lot as a beginner poetry book, and I mean, can't argue with that. I particularly like 1,000 Mornings by Oliver. It has a lot of really beautiful imagery of wildlife, and specifically, as the title suggests, it depicts the speaker's observations of dawn. It shows a lot more restraint when it comes to the use of figurative language and relies a lot more on the speaker's literal observations of morning, which I think in general people find more approachable. I'll show a couple examples of her shorter poems on the screen here. Feel free to pause to read. But the main beginner-friendly, nature-focused poetry collection that I wanted to bring up today is actually one that I read recently and I loved, and that's Ada Limon's The Hurting Kind. I felt entranced by the way a lot of these poems reframe our relationship as humans to the nature and animals around us. Throughout the collection, she kind of subverts our typical ideas of hierarchy in a way that worships and even envies the simplistic beauty of birds, rabbits, and even groundhogs. And a lot of these poems, Limon highlights a one-sided relationship where we as humans are observing and relying on animals but are of no significance whatsoever to them. Pretty humbling, to say the least. To give you a little preview, this poem on page 3, titled Give Me This, quote, I thought it was the neighbor's cat, back to clean the clock of the fledgling robins low in their nest, stuck in the dense hedge by the house. But what came was much stranger, a liquidity, moving, all muscle and bristle, a groundhog slippery and waddle thieving my tomatoes. Still green in the morning's shade, I watched her munch and stand on her haunches, taking such pleasure in the watery bites. Why am I not allowed to delight? A stranger writes to request my thoughts on suffering. Barbed wire pulled out of the mouth as if demanding that I kneel to the trap of coiled spikes used in warfare and fencing. Instead, I watch the groundhog more closely, and a sound escapes me, a small spasm of joy I did not imagine when I woke. She is a funny creature, and earnest, and she is doing what she can to survive. One of my friends actually gave me this as a birthday present a few years ago, and when I was in the middle of reading it, I sent him this text. I'll show the receipts on the screen. But basically, all you need to know is I didn't lie. It was tea. Now, if you're looking for poetry with more structure, you're probably going to want to take a look at formal poetry as a potential style to look into. Notice how Limon's poems have, the occasional internal rhyme here and there, but they're not going all out with a full-on rhyme scheme. The collected poems of Emily Dickinson, however, is a great start for all of my rhymers out there. Yes, okay, Dickinson was known for bending the rules of rhyme and meter sometimes, but for the most part, she mainly followed 4-line stanzas called quatrains with a consistent rhyme structure repeated throughout the stanzas. Something about Miss Emily is she loved her some quatrains and she loved her some 2nd and 4th line rhymes. The 1st and 3rd line rhymes, she didn't care as much about. You'll see them pop up occasionally. In this semi-playful but also somehow morbid poem, I don't know how she does it, Dickinson ponders how she would tell places and objects around her of her inevitable death. She writes in ballad stanza structure, quote, "I have not told my garden yet, lest that should conquer me. I have not quite the strength now to break it to the bee. I will not name it in the street, for shops would stare that I, so shy, so very ignorant, should have the face to die. The hillsides must not know it, where I have rambled so, nor tell the loving forests the day that I shall go, nor lisp it at the table, nor heedless by the way, hint that within the riddle one will walk today." I think Dickinson's work is a great starting place for formalists because she has enough repeated tendencies to kind of familiarize you with ballad structure and other poetry forms, but she also has enough variation in her collected works that you'll get a taste of multiple different approaches to formalist poetry. For example, she experimented with different meter structures throughout her career and got increasingly, let's say, generous with what she counted as rhyme. Slant rhyme, I'm looking at you. And luckily for us, her simultaneous interest in traditional structure and modern exploration is all captured in books like this. It also gives you a really good range of topics in her poems, as you can see from this table of contents. Switching to short poetry, those of you who are looking for little passing glimpses of interesting imagery and thoughts, I would recommend Ty Gardner's 1,000 Little Things, one-line poems to spark a thought. A lot of the reason why Insta poetry has become so popular is its brevity. The fact that you can read it in, well, an instant. And I would argue that Gardner's lines give a similar effect, but aren't pretending to be fully completed poems. Rather, as the title suggests, they are musings or observations to spark further imagination in the reader. These lines also, for the most part, steer clear of a lot of the overly abstract, generalizing cliches that I take issue with in Insta poetry. Instead, they focus more on imagery and the 5 senses. For example, where an Insta poet might write something like, "I wish I could hold you, but for now, letters will have to do." Gardner instead writes, quote, "100 hold me nows, ink spattered on cream-colored cardstock." Notice how in a very simple one-line image, Gardner already is writing more poetically than the faux Insta poem that I just shared, mainly because he actually uses a poetic device, imagery, to describe the cream-colored cardstock and the ink spattered words "hold me now." Gardner provides exactly 1,000 of these lines. Some are more conceptual, others are simply images. And while I definitely say that some are far more inspired and interesting than others, the cool thing about his choice to curate the book this way is that you can easily just move past lines that don't interest you.
Carry on. Thank you, next.
And use the lines that do interest you as imaginative launching points for your own poetic thought. This is, in many ways, a different kind of reading experience than most other collections. It prompts you as the reader to think more poetically, and you get to decide how long you want to entertain that poetic thinking in relation to each individual line. A few lines that I particularly enjoyed from the first few pages would be number 9, "Daydreaming of Rainstorm," number 14, "The Feeling of Stars on Bare Skin," number 29, "The Great Tragedy of the Sun's Love for the Moon," number 30, "Acrostic crossroads resounding our station throughout the infinite cosmos," and number 32, drowning in thoughts and writing yourself a life raft. I thought he did something with those. I thought those were cool. If you're looking to get into writing poetry as well, you could even use these lines as literal writing exercises by expanding on Gardner's one line. Just obviously, if you end up wanting to publish that work at some point, make sure you give credit to Gardner. Next, we're going to be looking at a beginner-friendly collection that leans more towards spoken word style, which makes sense because the poet, Amanda Gorman, is known for her spoken word performances. I know some people like to clown on the poetry slam archetype, the person who's putting exaggerated emphasis on like way too many words when they read their work out loud.
Look at me! Me! Social media?
That is so true.
The rich are trying to make a case for capitalism. Nah, I'm trying to lower the case.
Because capitalism is like capital.
We're losing bees at an alarming speed. Have we lost our hive mind?
Yes.
Losing bees is not the bee's knees, so let's focus on the bee's needs.
And listen, I might chuckle lightly at those parody videos, okay, but I don't think that they're actually an accurate representation of spoken word. Despite it really not being the typical style I gravitate towards, I really did enjoy this collection, Call Us What We Carry by Amanda Gorman. Pretty sure in one of Roughest Drafts videos he mentions this collection as a good starting point for people looking to get into poetry. And I definitely agree if you're drawn to inspirational, sort of like call to action poetry. Poetry that could be read as a motivational speech in a sense. A lot of that attention to cadence, the way the words sound out loud, ends up appearing in this collection. Much like a lot of spoken word, the poems in this collection do have a political lens. You may remember Gorman from her inaugural poem that she performed after the 2020 election. Instead of the collection of political activism, though, I'd argue her style is more interested in describing, either through personification or metaphor, more broadly applicable abstract concepts like hope, grief, and togetherness. That said, Gorman does include more imagery-based language alongside her more abstract musings. Another poem titled In the Deep is an example of this. Reading, quote, "Slowly as the sea, we found the stubborn devotion to say, where we can, we shall hope. We found it in a million delicacies of enormity, an infant's full-chested chortle, July glassing our skin, music blurring a summered street. How, when we're among friends, our laughter can stomp up from nothing. Through this hole punched in the roof, we can see a stitch of sky. Our wounds, too, are our windows. Through them, we watch the world." Now, technically, Gorman uses some experimental formatting in this collection, but I really wouldn't say the experimentalism is at the forefront of her work. It's more so a backup singer to her main act, which is her inspirational writing. Austin Kleon's newspaper Blackout, however, is an experimental poetry collection that I would recommend for beginners. For those of you who have been watching my videos, you're probably familiar with Blackout poetry by now. But for those of you who haven't heard of it, it's when an author takes a text and redacts a lot of the words on the page, and then the words that are left visible create poetry. This book does a solid job of introducing people to the Blackout poetry genre without any of the perplexing meta commentary and lofty through lines found in Tom Phillips's A Humament. Unlike A Humament, this erasure poetry collection is simply a bunch of individual Blackout poems, and you can read them in any order. Each one redacts a random section of a different New York Times newspaper, and the tone of the poems range from silly to deep to, of course, the occasional abstract anomaly. Kleon really does a little bit of everything with these poems, which is why I think it's such a good introductory work. Side note, if you're looking to get into writing poetry as well, found poetry could be a good way to start. While some writers find it restrictive, others may feel like it's less intimidating to have words already in front of them that they can work with, instead of just staring at a blank page and not knowing where to start. Erasure poems can also get you to create more unexpected word groupings because there is a set number of words that you can use. And you can use anything with text on it to do this, whether it be newspapers like Austin Kleon or the parking ticket that you don't want to pay. I know there's this common sentiment of like you need to read traditionalist literature in order to touch anything modern with a 10-foot pole. The whole idea that you need to know the rules before you break them. And look, I think it's undoubtedly the case that the more different styles of poetry you read, the better your writing will be. What I don't agree with is telling people that they shouldn't pursue poetry that they're excited by because there's an objective order that you need to follow based on when a piece of literature came out. What that does is it stops people who could have been potentially interested in poetry from ever even trying it, because they think they need to read, all of Shakespeare's sonnets to even glance at anything written in the 21st century. All that to say, choose your own adventure out of the books that we've gone over today. Start with the ones you're most drawn to and continue to expand your poetry library out from there. That's going to be it for today's video. If you found this video helpful, please consider giving this a like. It helps other people see my content. And if you have any beginner-friendly poetry recommendations, please leave them down in the comments, along with, as I mentioned, any questions that you might have for a future author Q&A. I hope you'll have a great day, and I'll see y'all next time.